we wanted to make sure to provide a special webinar for our local development districts so that you can have specific time with us to not only review the NOFA, but also be able to ask your own questions beyond the potential funding applicants who were on the webinar 2 days ago. I know some of you were on the webinar 2 days ago, and thank you for joining for that. But again, this is time for y'all. This will provide time for the LDD specifically to ask questions. I would like to direct you to our Reimagining Delta Workforce page where you can access the NOFA. If you do not have the NOFA available, you can go to the web page that is on the screen, and you can download the NOFA there if you would like to use it for during this webinar. Again, we have Kent Morgan, whom you're familiar with, as well as Angela Shirey, our policy assistant, who will be overseeing the funding program. And we have them to identify both the purpose as well as the steps for the program. So just to review the agenda, we will have Angela reviewing the funding opportunity, the purpose behind it, and how this speaks to DRA's policies on workforce development, and then again reviewing the strategies identified in our report, Reimagining Workforce Development. We will review the award information, how to apply, who's eligible, what are the best uses of these funds, what can these funds be used for, what's ineligible for these funds. And then Kemp will review the basic eligibility requirements for applicants as well as for the uses again. And then we'll review the application requirements, submission, timeline, and such. Obviously, our LDDs are very familiar with submitting through funding.dra.gov, but just walking through that so we know that, so that you understand, any differences from the CDAP application process. And then finally wrap up, and we'll have some time for about 15 to 20 minutes of time for questions and answers. If you have questions that arise during the webinar, please enter those into the question bar so that I can queue them up and we will address them. If you would like to make clarification on an answer that you don't think fully answered your question, please click the raise your hand button and I'll unmute you. And with that said, everyone is on mute so that the webinar runs smoothly, or not run smooth, but so that everyone can hear Kemp and Angela's presentations as well as for the recording. However, again, if you would like to make a clarification, I can click unmute and would be happy to give you the floor so that the recording can hear you. And then again, I want to reiterate that if you have any questions beyond the webinar, please feel free to email our team at deltaworkforce@dra.gov, and we will be happy to address those questions as well. And so I will kick it off to Angela.
All right. Thank you, Spencer. Good afternoon, everyone. As Spencer stated, my name is Angela Shirey, and I'm the policy assistant for the Workforce Initiative here at Delta Regional Authority. I want to spend a few minutes this afternoon to kind of give you background information about why this fund and this initiative is very important for Delta Regional Authority. Chairman Madison Gill has made this one of his initiatives because, as we all know, the development of a very strong workforce is so critical to economic development. And with DRA being a federal economic development agency, it's something that we find very important and we want to support and put financial resources behind. The fund was created to build a competitive technical assistance and capacity building fund, which would also include planning and implementation that will allow rural communities and parishes to develop a connected workforce system on the local level with business and industry as well as educational systems. This is the first time that DRA has launched a funding program that is specifically for workforce development. I know that you guys have worked with DRA and Kent and his team in the past on other projects, but again, this fund will be set aside specifically for the workforce development initiative for communities. DRA has had a series of workforce development summits happening since June entitled Reimagining the Delta Workforce. We had a report commission that was authored by Ted Abernathy and Linda Hoke. And in this report, it talks about 3 different components where we will focus and that we focused on. One is reimagining readiness. The second is re-engaging disconnected youth and adult learners. And the third is realigning relationships and resources. And the way this report connects with this funding opportunity is that these are the 3 critical components that we will look for when evaluating applications. And so just to give you a bit of information about each of these 3 components, if you've not already attended one of our summits, reimagining readiness sort of speaks to strengthening the connections between education and job skills, and then rethinking the value of credentials in the workplace. We know that what it means to be ready for the world of work has changed. You know, the way things were back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and in the early 2000s, for that matter, has changed. You know, a while ago, having a college degree or a high school diploma was all that you might need to be successful. But nowadays, you know, there are lots of different certifications. There's much more global competitiveness happening. And so the way that, you know, the way things used to be in terms of like being ready for work has changed. And so part of what we want to do is have our communities, states, and towns really think about, you know, what that means today. And so that's one aspect that the report addresses. The second addresses re-engaging disconnected youth and adult learners. Right now we know that there are a lot of adults who, you know, who might not have proper credentials, which means certifications or a college degree or a high school diploma. And so we want to address those people who are out there who are sort of not employed or who might be underemployed. We want to reach those disconnected youth who, you know, might have a degree or a diploma, but who are just sort of waffling, if you will. And then the last is realigning relationships and resources. And so we all know that education is linked to the business and industry. And so what we want to do is make sure that our educational systems, starting with pre-K and elementary, through high school, through secondary, and then post-secondary education systems are all connected, leading towards our you know, graduates really being ready for the needs of business and industry. Okay, and so that just sort of gives you a high-level, a very high-level explanation of the report. And again, when communities are submitting applications, we really want them to incorporate all 3 of those components into their letter of intent, which is a part of their application. And that report can be found on the DRA website. In addition, if you've not yet attended a workforce development summit, we personally invite you to attend. We have 4 more that are being planned. We have one in Clarksville, Mississippi, this Monday, September 8th. We have another that's scheduled for September 18th in, sorry, give me one second, September 18th in Thibodaux, Louisiana. We have another scheduled for September 23rd in, October 7th in Madisonville, Kentucky. And then we're getting our last rescheduled in Carterville, Illinois. So for those of you who are in Illinois, we will be in contact with you to let you know of that date. if you'll advance the slide, Spencer, to give you a quick description of this funding opportunity. As I just mentioned, the 3 components that are in the Reimagining Workforce Development Report, the end result that we want to achieve is we want to increase the number of quality jobs and careers attained by our available workforce. We want to improve the quality of lives, and we want to rebuild communities. So essentially, those are the 3 hallmarks of Delta Regional Authority. All right, so we want this, we expect this funding opportunity to directly align with what DRA stands for and our mission, and ultimately we do believe that that very strong applicants will address these 3 things. I'll talk just a second about one strong program that we've researched, and by all means it is not the only program that communities can choose, but it's one that we've been fairly impressed with, and that's the ACT program. We worked with Deborah Lyons, who's based in Atlanta, Georgia, with her ACT Certified Work Ready Communities Academy. And what ACT will do is that they will work hand in hand with communities who've been accepted for funding, and they will work with each community to build an individualized plan that is specific to that community. It's a year-long program, and at the end of it, there's an exam called ACT Work Keys, which will sort of measure, or in a way measure, the skills that business and industry are looking for. So it's a really good measure that demonstrates that the workforce has those very specific skills that certain industries or businesses are looking for. And so we've really been impressed with that program. And so if communities, call the LDDs or ask about recommendations or just, questions of what will a development plan look like, ACT is one of those organizations that we will use that could help build a workforce development plan for communities. And so if you guys have questions about that, please type that into your chat box, and I can talk more about that in a bit.
Oh, my turn. Sorry. I'm a bit under the weather. Unfortunately for y'all, I think you know most of my parts here. Really to speak to the amount of funding, the total allocation that we have for this particular initiative is $1.7 million. It is funds that we have pooled together from RCAP dollars. And so if you're familiar with the RBEG, RBOG guidelines, that's kind of what some of the guidelines that are melded into the NOFA. So definitely want y'all to be familiar with the Reimagining Workforce Report and the NOFA material. If y'all get calls, basically y'all would be able to direct those folks to us. And so with those RCAP funds, like other projects that we've funded in the past, there's not an LDD project admin fee associated with it. So definitely want y'all to be aware of that. However, also want y'all to be aware that y'all would be an eligible entity as part of a team approach. You can be the lead applicant. So I know a lot of you have some of our programs either working or in the works, and definitely want to steer you to those guidelines. Award range will start at $50,000 for single county coverage areas. We will look at up to an additional $100,000 for a multi-county coverage area. That would be a maximum of $150,000 for any one application. those applicants basically who demonstrate a strategic regional approach could be eligible for the maximum award. So next slide, Spencer. The basic eligibility requirements that, like I said, y'all are familiar enough with DRA and USDA. I don't even know if I need to go over these, but of course, local development districts, cities, states, workforce agencies, chambers, educational institutions. We're looking for a team approach. Y'all kind of, if you're applying, partner with these other groups, the institutions of higher learning, cities, states. We're trying to get the local leaders educated on this, so it's not so much for specific programs, but the assessment and the planning stage, definitely, the technical assistance, that's what these funds could be used for. There's a limited implementation support that could be found eligible. However, and Spencer, you may want to chime in on this. We just had a conversation with the chairman. Not for construction, not for equipment, unless, and Spencer, this is where I need your help.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So the way we're looking at structuring this is that communities or consortia of communities and organizations who are applying, they will either fall into two buckets. They will either fall into a group of communities or community that has, up to this point, not done any planning or is not at the level, their community leaders are not at the level of technical expertise or capacity to begin planning and pulling together systemic programs that address their workforce development needs. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket would be that the community or communities and its leadership are at that point to where they have been planning or they're ready to start planning and then implementing that plan. So for the first bucket, they will be expected to submit an application that addresses how that community's leadership can be trained and gain experience and capacity to begin the planning process and to begin identifying ways in which they can address their workforce development needs. That's the first bucket. The second bucket, if they already have done that and checked that box, then they would be submitting applications for the implementation of programs, a program or programs that they have begun planning already that speak to the larger system of workforce development in their region, that are additionally addressing some of the major issues. You know, if there is a program that a multi-county program that community leaders are developing to address a high level of disconnected adult learners, or to re-engage the youth population that in their experience has been very disengaged and is not in the workforce system or workforce training system. That's the kind of application that we'd be expecting from bucket 2.
Thank you, Spencer. I definitely could not have said it that well. So if you'll skip on to the next slide, the application requirements. Basically, y'all are familiar with our web application portal, and you direct those folks to go there, create a login. If they've had a login in the past, they should just be able to log in right there. And we need the only thing that's really different from the application standpoint for CDAP is that we will need a one-page letter of interest that it includes those items listed there. And basically, it's the short version narrative. Probably just take the information that's in that letter and apply it to the project narrative section and expound on it just a bit so that we understand the system approach that these applications would require. And so the project narrative, the 424, 424A and B, all of those must be completed. As I hope most of you know, within the 424 form itself, on about page 4 or 5 of it, there's a spot to upload documents, and definitely upload the letter of interest and any other supporting letters or supporting documentation that is needed. You put Word docs or PDFs or JPEGs or whatever there. I'll be glad to answer any questions at the end here. Next slide. Yeah, and so I know y'all already know this, but you would go to the login, either create it or log in, and this would be the first page that you would see. This is the project abstract, and that would begin the application process. So if y'all are getting calls and questions, definitely want y'all to be aware of where to go, how to get there, what to do when you get there, and that kind of thing. The next slide, application requirements. Application submission deadline is October 31st, midnight, October 31st. We will send out notice of awards beginning November 10th. And with that, I'll be glad to take questions. Spencer?
So, yeah, sorry, I was unmuting myself. So now that we have concluded the webinar session, opening it up for question and answer time, if you will type in any questions into your question bar on the GoToWebinar window, those questions will come into me, and I will state them so that everyone can hear, and then we will have Kemp, Angela, or I address them. And I currently do not have any questions yet, so if you have questions, please type it in.
Spencer, if your questions are slow to come in, then we can just go over a couple from Tuesday's webinar.
Sure. So we've had one come in, and the first one is from Jason Vincent. How about funding entrepreneurial self-employment programs or conferences?
That would be a negative. We're looking, kind of like Spencer said, a systems approach, and for the technical assistance and the planning activities is really where our focus is. We did want to give a nod to those communities that had already begun the planning process, and so helping to implement some structure, put some structure in place so that these workforce development activities could occur. As a entrepreneurial kind of deal. It sounds like it's a program that's already sort of established to me. I don't know. It could be wrong, Jason.
We get another question in that do multiple counties all need to be in the DRA area?
Yes. Unless you have other funds in the project, which we would encourage also, those other funds could be delineated some way to fit those non-DRA counties and parishes. So that would probably be the only way that would work.
Okay. while we're waiting on any more questions to come in, some of the questions that were asked on Tuesday addressed what would be provided in the NOFA. So again, to direct everyone to the NOFA, which is available on our website on the Delta Workforce page. The NOFA identifies all of the application requirements and eligibility requirements that we've identified within the webinar today. But additionally, it identifies that there is a 10% match required. And the purpose behind this, which was stated on Tuesday, is that we're hoping that applicants will be working across sectors within their community or multi-county region to build support among different community players. And by requiring that 10% match, we're hoping that they will be obtaining that buy-in from local stakeholders and pulling in multiple partners on that note.
That could also be cash or in-kind contributions that would count toward that 10% match.
Correct.
I also wanted to mention the scoring rubric that we put together. It's mentioned in the NOFA, and it describes each of the 7 areas that the applications will be scored on. That'll help you build a comprehensive application, I believe.
We have another question that just came in from Jason. From my understanding of Angela's presentation, that much of the funding will be focused around building connections between higher education and industrial, or an industry that addresses disconnected workers. Is that correct?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
So the question is, will much of the funding need to be focused around building connections between higher education and industry that would address disconnected workers specifically?
Would we want to address all 3 equally? I don't know that should be the emphasis of an application. I think it should, probably equally address all 3 of those components.
I think we just want to encourage those relationships. They definitely need to be at the table. It helps establish the systems approach that I keep referring to. I hope that answers your question, Jason.
Yeah. And other examples of partnering organizations, in addition to the 2-year colleges and 4-year colleges, would be organizations like your local Chamber of Commerce, your workforce development organizations, any business and industry who might want to take part. If you have major plants or manufacturing companies there. So those would be other examples of partnering organizations in addition to the educational institutions.
Any other questions?
And another question that was brought up that on Tuesday that I think is important to clarify is that the letter of intent does not come separately before the application is submitted. The letter of intent will be uploaded as part of the 424 form, which all are familiar with. But the focus of the letter of intent is more as an executive summary of what the program entails, what the application entails, how it is addressing the pieces of the report, the 3 components of the report, and then how it is speaking to a larger systemic change, or not change, but a larger systemic achievement amongst the communities in addressing workforce development needs. Another question that we have from Barbara Scott, are these one-year grants? Does DRA anticipate this funding will be available annually?
So far, this program is just $1.7 million for this year. Like I said, we pulled together some older RCAP funding that was not being used at the time, so trying to clean things up. The project itself, the application, I think we would probably be more favorable for projects that took a 12-month period with RCAP funding. We can go up to 2 years, so it would be capped and limited at 2.
And just to go back to what I mentioned earlier about the ACT Work Ready Community Academy, that is a one-year program. And so if communities chose to go that route, then the funding would be, all used up within a year. So that would address that question.
Are there any other questions coming from the LBDs? If not, I will move on to another question that was addressed, and we addressed this a little bit in the webinar, but one of the questions was for clarification of approved implementation support, and again, that speaks to the second bucket of applicants, which would be those communities that have already begun the planning process and or have a plan in place ready to implement. So that implementation support would be for a program or effort to systemically enhance the workforce development in that region with activities that directly address those workforce issues. And that implementation support can include a number of different program activities and could include an equipment purchase within the application or within the application and budget narrative but that equipment purchase, for example, would have to be justified in supporting the larger program goal of supporting the community's workforce needs on a more systemic level. Additionally, within that implementation support, it would not include ineligible funding activities such as construction due to the limitations of the funding program. Another question has come in from Rob Goad. Will the funds cover operating costs such as salaries?
I believe that is in the NOFA as a unallowable cost. I figured you guys would know most of this.
Yeah,
and
then a final. It seems like everyone's asked their questions. One final question that was addressed is: can applications be cross-state or a coalition of counties that exist in more than one state and share a border? And our answer to that is yes. It is. Yes, a multi-county consortium is eligible, no matter if it's a number of different states represented, as long as all of those counties are within the DRA region.
Right. Also, if any of the CDAP applications that were submitted this year sort of fit this mold, I think we noticed one or two, they may be considered for this funding as opposed to CDAP.
And so with that, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and round out the webinar. And again, thank you all for joining us for the webinar. Before we leave, I'd like to again reiterate that we have our Mississippi Workforce Summit coming up next Monday. For those of you based in Mississippi, we kindly ask that you forward on the reminder email or at least the registration link to your stakeholders and your active economic developers in your communities to encourage them to join for the conversation. We believe that these summits have been a good launching point for applicants or for communities to begin their application or to even begin the networking process of identifying opportunities for partnerships towards a successful application. So we encourage you to both join us as well as encourage your stakeholders and neighbors to join. Additionally, we will be providing a recording of the webinar to you. We had some technical difficulties on Tuesday, and so it might be a day or so until we get you that recording. We are trying to work those out, but please know that we will get you the recording as well as the PowerPoint slide deck so that you can have that available. Additionally, we will be posting all questions posed with the answers so that everyone is on an equal ground in understanding all of our clarifications to questions posed. Those questions will be available on the Reimagining Delta Workforce site, which again on your screen you can see is at dra.gov/initiative/delta-workforce.aspx. It can also be navigated from dra.gov under our policy initiatives. So with that, thank you very much for joining us, and any other questions can be directed to Angela and our team at Delta Workforce at dra.gov, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.